it helps alleviate, some of the stress, some of the emotional toll that it takes during difficult shifts. And I know the research suggests that interacting with animals, I mean, that's what happens. We start reducing our cortisol levels, which are pegged usually when we're having a bad day
Yes.
or we're just feeling off. Like usually when you look at your cortisol levels, and for some of us, they might be pegged for several days. And so, like I have an emotional support animal. I got a PTSD therapy dog. Portia. She will come up and she knows when I'm off. Like you'll see her get up and come over. She also protects me from under the individuals that she might sense that might be adding to my stress. And it's funny because while they and it's not a good reaction, I should say, but sometimes she'll growl, and she's never bitten anybody. But mainly, it's to create that barrier that, hey, you're triggering my owner. This is my owner. I'm here to protect him when he doesn't even know he needs to be protected.
Thank you for tuning in to the Critical Conversations podcast, brought to you by Mind the Frontline. Established in 2023 as a 501c3, Mind the Frontline is your ally in the journey to support those who selflessly safeguard our communities. Their core mission revolves around pioneering innovation and research, education, and overall well-being specifically tailored to healthcare, military, and public service frontline first responders. The Critical Conversation podcast is a dedicated space for police, fire, EMS, allied health workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Here, we dive into the heart of the matter, tackling essential topics such as mental health strategies, recovery methods, treatment options, the latest research, and professional development opportunities. Before we dive into today's episode on Critical Conversations, we do want to, however, acknowledge the nature of our discussions. Some of the content discussed may be triggering or intense as we explore the challenges and the triumphs within the first responder community. We recognize that these discussions may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you or someone you know is struggling and needs immediate support, we urge you to reach out to your agency's mental health resources or your local peer support group. In time of mental health crisis, you can always contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by phone or via text at 988. Please remember you are never alone and help is always available. At Mind the Frontline, we are more than just a podcast. We are a community committed to fostering resilience within the entire first responder family. So whether you're on the front lines or supporting those who are, we invite you to subscribe, engage, and be a part of this vital mission. To learn more, please visit us at www.mindthefrontline.org. Now let's dive into today's critical conversation.
Welcome back to Critical Conversations by Mind the Front Lines, the podcast for first responders, listeners, and Mind the Frontline members. On today's episode, we are discussing how to navigate the emotional toll on 911 and air medical dispatchers. I'm absolutely honored to have Corbin Doades. He's our guest speaker. Corbin has been in public safety for over 20 years. He is a former National Guard member, an EMT, and emergency dispatcher for 911 over at Knox County Central Dispatch. And he absolutely brings some valuable experience and knowledge to our ongoing mission of fostering resilience within the first responder community. And he's actually my first dispatcher to come on the show. And I'm super thrilled to have this conversation because we want to make sure that we are informing our dispatchers that we as Mind the Frontline do see them, and we want to have them engage in these conversations and be a part of our mission to help others in fostering that resilience, finding resources for recovery, and continuing to grow. Corbin, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. How are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So kind of tell me a little bit more about like your background and what got you into not only EMS. I saw that you were a National Guard member. Thank you very much for your service, but you're also an EMT. And how long have you been dispatching? Like what got you into EMS and 911 dispatching?
Well, I joined the my local volunteer fire department in 2003, and it just kind of spiraled from there. Did about 10 years on and off with them because I was in the National Guard. And then in 2014, I had left my job working in the factory and was kind of in between jobs. And the director of our center at the time just randomly called me and said, "Hey, are you still interested in dispatching?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I kind of need a job, so I'll give it a shot." And I've been there since, and I'm loving it.
So born out
So
of necessity, and here you are, making a difference on individuals, worst time of their life, most of the time. If we're calling 911, it's not because we're calling for a doctor's appointment or something like that. It's usually because, you know, our community or a community member is in crisis. So kind of tell me a
definitely.
little bit about, I kind of want to understand and help our viewers and our listeners understand a little bit more about, what does a 911 dispatcher kind of experience on a day to day? What's your kind of role, responsibilities, and more importantly, like what do you experience or feel on a day to day, basis, answering those calls for help?
Well, for me, I can only speak for myself. Everybody's different. Every center's different. Um, but for me, it's a sense of helping. I'm one of those people that has to have something to do within the community, and this is my way of giving back to the community by keeping them safe. Um, in my center, we're all certified as emergency medical dispatchers to the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch, and it helps us provide life-saving instructions, CPR instructions to callers when they're in need, and that's just one way that we can help.
So you
It's
guys through your training as EMDs, which, I think when I started coming into the profession, back in 2003, just being a 911 dispatcher was kind of taking a call, routing it, getting the resources to where they need to be. But we've seen that over the years really transform with the implementation of EMD. Is that now like a standard for most 911 or if not all 911 centers?
most centers, yes. There's the academies, and then there's the APCO version, or and I think there's Powerphone. I think they're kind of interconnected with each other, but um, it's one standardized, um, basically a script that's been approved by doctors um, nationwide, and it's also I would say worldwide actually, because they use it quite a bit overseas. Um, I know the UK, just all of them use it, either APCO or the academies. I know Australia uses the academies. Um, it's grown quite a bit, and this is how we uh, like to classify ourselves as the first responders. Because even though we're not on
Absolutely.
scene helping the patient, we're on the phone giving them life saving instructions, and that's why we do what we do. We help those in need.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting these distressed callers, that may have had a traumatic event or life and death scenarios occurring, and essentially you're providing that initial care before paramedics or police like me can get on scene. You're able to actually start affecting the patient's outcome before the medical services even get there. And I think that's got to be fulfilling. But at the same time, I got to also imagine, at least for me, I'm a paramedic, so I get on scene. You guys are the ones that dispatch us. You also kind of look over us as our guardian angels. And that's what I kind of call you guys and girls. So let's not leave the gals out. But I gotta imagine that, when I go on scene, I actually get to touch the patient, I get to see their face, and sometimes that can take its own emotional toll, but I actually, am able to physically put hands on them, transfer them to hopefully to a facility if they haven't expired. But I'm able to be involved. And so I get that kind of outcome too, so I understand the disposition of the patient. And I understand, at least through some of my other 911 dispatching friends, some of that takes an emotional toll because you may not always have that. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about, maybe the emotional toll that you might see with dispatchers or, just kind of just doing that job, taking that first call and being involved and then, having to hang up?
It is rough. 9 times out of 10, we don't know what the outcome is. We never get briefed on what happened with that patient. For example, in 2015, it was probably 6-7 months into me actually being a dispatcher. I had just had my third child, my youngest son, and I took a call for a toddler about the same age as my son that the parents walked in. They found it not breathing, and I had to give them instructions on how to start CPR on the child. The local law enforcement showed up and determined that the child needed to be rushed away, so they transported him because our ambulance was coming from another town. It was going to take a while. I never knew what happened, but I was ready to go home after that. I was 2 hours into my 8-hour shift. So immediately, as soon as I got home, I went to my youngest child and gave him the biggest hug ever and just held him for like the next hour. So it can take a pretty good toll on you. But as long as you have a positive way to express what you're feeling, it can help you cope with what you're dealing with. And that's kind of important for dispatchers because there's a lot of calls that we can take. We never know what the outcome is, or it can be a really bad call and you already know what the outcome is based on what you're hearing. Not necessarily over the radio, over the phone, but also over the radio. And it kind of sticks with you, and you don't know how to express it, and you just let it build up, and over time, it's basically like the demons inside of you just finally give up, and that's why we have, I don't know what the exact stats are, but we do have dispatchers that decide to end it, and it's a tragedy. It's similar to like any other first responder.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the profound emotional toll it does take on you dispatchers, especially, I don't know if it's, what someone would call that, but for me, hanging up and not knowing the disposition or the outcome of a traumatic patient that you were, trying to provide EMD to life-saving, interventions before the EMS gets on scene or police or fire. I do know that studies have shown that dispatchers experience a high level of stress, anxiety, and burnout just due to the demanding nature, but that unresolved kind of trauma because you're basically like hanging up and like you only got half of the story, how do you make peace with that? And at least from a paramedic side, I can only empathize with what you dispatchers might be going through, especially after a traumatic call. You're saying, hey, 2 hours into this 8-hour shift, I was smoke checked. Like, brother, I wanted to go home. I wanted to not be there anymore. And you kind of have to keep powering through it. It's similar to, I've had bad calls on some of my shifts, and it's not like I get the option to go home. I might get the option to maybe take a break or step away, but those phones, they just keep on ringing some days, and I know some days are especially overwhelming for dispatch centers, just depending on what's going on.
Yes.
I've been in there where some dispatchers, dispatch centers are trying to call in extra help to have people come in and just answer the phones just because it's one of those kind of catastrophic events that might be occurring, or flooding, or just whatever might be going on. But the vicarious trauma and the intrusive thoughts, that I do understand how they might be emotionally numbing, and how increased vigilance to what you dispatchers experience could be extremely helpful for not only processing some of these calls, but at the same time, it doesn't make it any easier some days, right?
Yeah. It varies how each individual deals with the stress, but it can be rough. And unfortunately for us, we were stuck there. And this, depending on the center, our center is really small, so we're stuck in this small room for 12 hours. Um, and we have to keep taking phone calls. We don't get a chance to step away because we only work with two dispatchers. We have to have two dispatchers in there at all times. The only exception is when we have to get up and use the restroom, or if we're getting up to get, a drink of water or make coffee. But we can't step outside and spend 20, 30 minutes out there to collect ourselves. And
to regather.
yeah,
And then, as you mentioned, you got to take that home afterwards. Going back, and I've been there, brother. Like I hear in your voice. There's calls where I come back home and I hug my family. I give them the biggest hug I possibly can, because I think we realize how valuable life is, but how suddenly life can be taken away from somebody, and your entire universe can change.
it,
And it doesn't just affect those where it's occurring. Now, don't get me wrong, to the patients and the callers that utilize 911, I'm sure it's an absolutely devastating event. But what I don't think they really understand, truly, the general public really doesn't understand, is exactly what you just described. I got to deal with this, and I got to compartmentalize it, and I got to push it down so I can continue to be of service for the other calls that are continuing to call and come in. And I don't get that momentary pause to collect myself or gather my thoughts or process what just happened. Sometimes not even until the end of your shift. And sometimes, you get off shift and, man, I got to go do this. I got life happening. I got maybe a kid's softball game, who knows? And so when do you kind of take that momentary pause, or, what is your kind of routine after you get off shift to maybe help so that emotional toll or that emotional burden isn't so high or isn't so great?
well, when I get home, I work the midnight shift or the overnight shift. I usually go straight to bed, and then once I get up for the day, um, I may spend time with the kids, or I might just sit down on my couch and just watch television or play on my Xbox, and that's my stress relief. Um, I have other methods too. Occasionally I'll write down my thoughts on paper, or do an outdoor activity, just something to take my mind off of all my issues. I don't just have issues from being a dispatcher. I also have issues from being deployed twice, and um, issues from when I was a volunteer firefighter. You know, going to calls for that, it still builds up, and it lingers with you. No matter what you do, it's still there. But as long as you have a healthy way of releasing that stress and that the anger that builds up over time, you can work your way through it. And especially if you share your thoughts with not only just your spouse, but with your friends and your family, it it helps you release all that. And then they know what's going on with you too, so they can help you.
Yeah. I know, at least for me, and one of the main reasons I like sharing my story and being so transparent and raw is because it is cathartic for me. It allows me to work through my trauma. It allows me to kind of release the power it holds over me sometimes, that anger. And it comes out in other ways: stress, anxiety, depression, anger, resentment. Like, I think we run through the emotional gamut, and sometimes, at least for me, I'll get up in my head, and it can be a really dark place to be sometimes. And so, having some of these coping mechanisms and activities, for me, it helps. Now, I didn't get that early on in my career, and so I think when we talk about, like, looking at the vicarious stresses and the cumulative stress that not only EMS providers go through, but I think we as EMS providers sometimes forget what our brothers and sisters in the dispatcher centers are going through. And sometimes, like what you just described, like not knowing the outcome, um, and I remember that. I remember being on a ground unit, or working as a firefighter, and we would activate, air medical, and they would come pick up the patient and go, and you have no idea if what you did on scene made a difference, if they made it, if they didn't make it, what was the outcome. And that's just like, those are rare events, compared to what you dispatchers go through almost on a daily basis. But when we look at like cumulative stress, absorbing that emotional burden of the callers and their emergencies and their voices and the stress that they're under, and it kind of gets absorbed by you, the dispatcher. And I can understand, or maybe even see, over time, this is going to continue to accumulate, and that's what we talk about, like, cumulative stress, like just builds and builds and builds. And if we don't deal with that stress, dispatchers are equally at risk of developing PTSD. Now, that initial, insult, we call PTSS, and we know through the studies that, I have 14 days from the start of that insult to hopefully resolve it through therapy, through EMDR, whatever program works best for you, before it really grows roots and converts over to PTSD, which is, it's like a TBI.
Yeah,
It ain't going
it
away.
stays with you.
It's not going away anytime soon. It does. It stays with you, for a while. Talk to me a little bit about, like, the stresses. You mentioned that you kind of play Xbox, you do little things like that, but how is that cumulative stress? Because you mentioned it with your 2 deployments, working as a volunteer firefighter, how or when, at what point did you start recognizing that this cumulative stress was starting to impact you, and what did you do for it? Like, how did you decide to overcome that and become resilient, essentially, or find the tools that you might need to help with that cumulative stress, so when something like these traumatic events occur, in the dispatch center, that it's not turning into a lifelong event for you and a lifelong struggle? Now, I know there's certain things in really in my career that they're still with me today, and they'll probably never, ever go away. However, the noise isn't as loud. It's not as intrusive. And I have tools now to deal with some of those things. But I can tell you, early on in my career, man, there was days, and I did a podcast with Sam Brawley in the 911 Nonsense podcast last week. And, we talked about what was the worst day of my life. And I shared it. And I was like, that was the first time I recognized that, holy cow, this is going to kick me right straight in the nuts.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do.
It's like you said,
it was like a lightning bolt right to my nuts, man. I couldn't deal with it. I had no idea what to do, but dude, I'll tell you, I was scared shitless.
I can feel you on that one. It wasn't until about 2011, 2012, just shortly after my last deployment. I was working as a security guard and a firefighter for a chemical plant, and the stress from there was building up, and I started taking my anger out on my wife and my 2 children. Every little thing that they would do would just set me off.
Super irritable.
I became abusive. It got to the point where my wife gave me an ultimatum. Either you go get help, or I'm taking the kids and I'm leaving. And she was bags packed, sitting at the door, ready to leave. So I reached out to the VA and spoke with their counseling services there, and they gave me tools and made me aware of exactly why I was lashing out. And since then, I've been able to.
Sometimes you're not aware of it, right?
You're not aware, and until it becomes obvious to your family or your friends that something's going on, and they confront you with it. And I ignored the signs of it. My wife said she had tried to tell me that something was wrong, and I wasn't acknowledging it. So it led her to giving me that ultimatum: either go get help, or I'm leaving.
She was probably just trying to protect her at that point
Yes.
and your kids, and I've been there, what you say was just, that was me. I was the asshole. I was the asshole that wasn't the asshole because that's what I kept telling myself in my head. I don't have a problem. I got this. Um, you don't realize how irritable you are to those around you, but people didn't want to hang out with me. My own family was avoiding me because they were walking on eggshells at every step of the
Yeah.
way. And
My older two kids, they still tend to walk on eggshells around me because of all the trauma that they suffered because of me. But
yeah,
they've gotten better now. They've opened up to me. They've talked to me constantly. So they're aware that I have problems, and they're aware that there's certain things that will set me off. And I know some of my triggers, um, but there's some that pop up that I'm not aware of, and you just got to learn how how to recognize those triggers and how to deal with them, prevent them from um, setting you off, basically. Um, and that's either
yeah.
just
You mentioned that you weren't aware. For
yeah,
me, it was like a fog. I didn't know. I didn't kind of know any better. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know what resources. And I, I didn't even want to call EAP because I once again didn't think that was me. I didn't think I was that bad, right? Like
yeah. You don't know
we're our
you're that
own
bad,
worst enemies sometimes.
and
Yeah. So your wife packs the bags and go, hey, like I've been there. I came home. My wife was putting locks on our door to our bedroom, to the bedroom bathroom, because she was that scared of me. And the shitty part about this disease and these injuries is it not only takes a toll on us, but it takes a toll on our family. Like you mentioned, your kids, like both of my kids are very young. And so I know I've made some impressions on my daughter as at a young age that are going to be things that I need to continue to be aware of and help her navigate because man, they see the trauma that you are and they see this kind of monster and they don't know how to react to that. They're so young. Like dad's supposed to be dad. I'm supposed to be able to love on them and play. And yeah, I'm a kid, so I make mistakes. And yeah, I'm gonna do things that maybe dad doesn't agree with. But I feel like with the general public dads, and they see this right,
yeah,
and their friends, when they go over to their friend's house, they're like, oh well, so and so's dad. Like when I do something wrong or they do something wrong, like this is how he reacts. But when I do the same thing over here, my dad like goes to level 10 and it's like a nuclear explosion in the house.
yes, yes. That's the way it was with me, and I think it was a lot of it was the mentality that I received from, you know, the fire department and the military, because early 2000s and even earlier than that, the mentality was suck it up and deal with it. Now they're recognizing that,
Right.
hey, we have a problem. How do we correct this? And so now they're pushing uh, different programs out. There's peer-to-peer support groups. There's uh, a lot of departments are going to their local mental health counselors and getting them on board, making them available 24/7. So
Yeah.
a lot of departments are
It's a
recognizing
compounding thing.
that it's a problem, and so they need to have that help so they can keep their employees healthy and keep them um, from taking that plunge
Not
and
burning
not coming
out
back.
and not, yeah. I mean, I'd much rather, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. But like you mentioned, when I came into the service, same thing like you, the fire department had this machismo, my academy was very paramilitary, very strict, no emotion, just, get it done, bear it down. And then I learned bad coping mechanisms through those around me, because I'm a boot, right? I don't know any different coming into this industry. And so,
Yep.
seeing how other people would be aggressive and short, and I would just be like, oh, well, that's, and I remember this to this day, there's a lot of firefighters that, I remember being a boot at one station, and dude, this guy that my senior firefighter would just ride my ass, and he was a complete dick. And they're like, "Oh, well, that's just so and so. He's really a good guy." What I now know is he probably just didn't have good coping skills, and he was probably struggling. And then I see them get off shift, and it's like,
Yeah.
man, it wasn't just like a couple beers. It was like beer at 7:30 in the morning. We flip our shirts inside out. We're having
Yep.
beers at breakfast. We're going to the bar by noon. We're back out at night. It just, I got instilled, not only don't talk about this, but hey, by the way, here are some really destructive coping mechanisms just to put a cherry on top, brother.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back at it now and reflect back on it, everybody smoked. And then immediately, as soon as they got off work, it was, let's go to the bar if it's open. Let's stop at the liquor store and we'll pick up a 6-pack, 12-pack, whatever they have, we'll pick it up. We can go slam a few beers down and just have fun with it. And
and you're like, oh, all of a sudden I don't care anymore, and it doesn't really bother me. But we know it's a depressant. We know we're just bearing things down, and it just becomes more and more unresolved. But I mean, when you look at it, and I like how you mentioned that, like nowadays, I think employers and agencies and healthcare systems are really taking a hard look at it because, I'll break it down to two sides. First off, they're realizing that we do have a problem, and it's a serious, serious problem. I mean, the numbers don't lie. The statistics continue to show year after year, the suicide rates are almost doubling in some years, and we're not getting ahead of it. And we throw these new programs like SISM when it first came out. We're doing peer support now. We have more awareness. There's more resources out there. But once again, when I go back and I look at the suicide rates just for 2023, they're greater than 2022. And I hate to say this, but I expect 2024 to be even worse than 2023. I'm waiting for that year that we can finally arrest and at least stabilize. Like if 2024 is the same as 20, that's a win in my book, because at least we're doing something different to get ahead of this. But, it took those agencies to really kind of take a hard look at it. Right. And then you got to look at the cost. Like, agencies invest a lot of money into new hires and your career as far as, continued education and training and promotions and things like that. If I am only now able to get 10 good years out of an EMT or a paramedic or a police officer or a nurse versus before we were getting 20, and you're seeing those years get less and less and less, that means the companies are having to expend more money to bring in new hires, to do recruiting initiatives. And we know, just from the NEMT, the National Association of EMT stats, EMTs for the last 2 years, as far as, new EMTs coming into the profession, is on a pretty sharp decline.
it is.
Because I think the newer generation is just like, I don't want to deal with this shit. I've seen all the problems that you guys are all running into, and I don't.
And hearing all the
why would I
horror
do that to
stories
me?
about it.
Yeah. And that's a good question. Like, why would you want to get into a profession that you know is going to damage you, really set your life up for, hell? And I'm just being honest. I'm not saying that happens to everybody, but if I was on the outside looking about becoming a new police recruit or maybe a nurse or a physician or, corrections officer, whatever that might look like, and I'm seeing that, man, suicide rates in that industry are climbing. They have a high level of divorce and stress and suicide, alcoholism and substance abuse. And it's all because of the job. Why would I want to go jump into that pool and go, yeah, great, sign me up. I'm going to basically take a couple years off my life, guaranteed. Like, no, they're arming themselves with education and going, no, I'm not going to do that. So if we don't, as employers, take that stance and go, hey, we really got to get behind this, because, we talk about, like in the business side, they talk about, customer lifetime value, right? Like, what's the greatest amount of money you're going to get out of this customer in their entire lifetime with your company? I look at that as an employee. If we keep, if we don't arrest this downward trend, you're going to start seeing more and more companies become bankrupt just because they can't staff it. The overtime alone is killing them. And so I do think it's advantageous for employers to really invest in the not only just the response like SISM and peer support and things like that when we have a critical incident, but more importantly, the prevention and education and giving these individuals really good tools, good coping mechanisms, ensuring that they can get in and they're meeting quarterly or monthly with the chaplain or, the agency's therapist, whatever that looks like. But I do feel like we need to be spending a little bit more time and energy on the front end, not necessarily the back end. Like over the last couple of years, we have really buffered up, the back end trauma support, right?
Yeah,
But that's after a critical incident has occurred. And I don't mean like, hey, you saw a bad call, so you're going to go. I mean, you went and saw a bad call, you didn't deal with it, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. And now, there's a sentinel event or a breaking point where you're asking for help. There's a lot that can be done between before that happens to when it actually occurs. Because if I'm a more educated, resilient provider, when something happens, then more than likely I'm going to have those tools or be able to utilize those tools. And that's kind of like why we normalize trying to ask for help early on, normalize, it's okay to talk about things because we don't want to compartmentalize them and basically say, oh, nope, I don't have a problem, and give that PTSS the chance to set its roots in and really impact the rest of our life.
Yeah, the quicker you recognize the problem and get the tools in place ahead of time and make your employees aware that those tools exist to help them, the easier it's going to be for them to get that stress relief. And one of the things that we're pushing for in my center is a acknowledgement of emotional support animals. And
yeah,
currently we're allowed to have animals in our center, and we actually have
awesome.
an emotional support animal that comes and visits us quite regularly. My coworker Heather, she has skunks, domesticated skunks, that were rescued from fur farms, and she brings in her friend Nugget. That's his name. He comes and visits us just about every time she's on shift. And the other night, my coworker comes in, and Nugget's there, and she asks my coworker Heather, "Hey, can Nugget stay with us tonight? I'm having a real bad time. I need something to distract myself." So
need some comfort.
We
need to feel love.
We kept Nugget overnight, and he kept us on our toes, kept us focused on him and instead of on our problems. We were still able to take calls.
It kept you out of your head, right?
Yes.
Out of your head, because sometimes in our head is not a good place to be. Trust me, it's not a good place, especially if you're really, really struggling or you feel like you're kind of building up to that crisis. And kudos to your coworker for recognizing that.
Yeah.
It's things like that and preventative techniques. I had a chief and a deputy chief ask me, they're like, hey, they wanted some advice, for their agency on mental health and wellness. And that's one of the things that we do as an organization is kind of provide free consulting and things like that. But, I listened to, hey, what are you guys currently doing? And, they said, hey, we're doing, we got peer support, we're checking in with them quarterly just to see how they're doing, and things like that. And I said, those are great. Now, chief, permission to speak frankly. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, great. Cause I don't think you're going to like what I have to say. But when I broke it down for him, and it really was like, I literally saw the light bulbs go off in both of their eyes. It was actually, and it's one of the reasons why I love doing what I do. But essentially I said, chief, when it comes to physical fitness, because this is something that and you just got to break it down in a way that they can relate to, right? I said, when it comes to physical fitness and your guys, right, and your gals, your firefighters, you have a minimum fitness requirement. You guys, he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so you guys provide them with the gym membership. Yeah, everybody and their family gets a free pass to the rec center. I'm like, awesome. And while they're on shift, like your expectation is that they PT at least once a day while on shift. Yeah, absolutely. Like physical fitness is key to what we're supposed to do in our roles and be able to provide an emergency for our communities. And I said, oh, that's great. Now let me switch roles up here. What if I told you, well, you guys are doing these mental health check-ins and things like that once a quarter, which great. I mean, by the way, Chief, like that's more than most departments are doing. And so I applaud you for that. So please don't take this the wrong way. But essentially, when I hear that as someone like me, that's an advocate for first responder mental health and wellness, I look at it as okay, so you're saying that physical fitness is an absolute requirement. We expect you to be doing this almost daily. But when it comes to your mental health and wellness, well, we're going to do that once a quarter. So let's flip that around. Hey, Chief, what if you basically said, hey, once a quarter, I want you guys to go to the gym? Because that's essentially what you're saying. And it's not, they don't know any different,
Yeah,
right? That's why they're asking for help, which once again, I applaud them for it. But I really wanted to like drive that point home of mental health and wellness and physical fitness, good sleep, good diet. It all is encompassing. It's not something that you can do quarterly, monthly. It's probably something that you need to have a routine built in to do this stuff every day because they are interconnected. And so if we're saying, hey, it's okay to check in once a year with the counselor, okay, well, would you say, hey, it's okay if you work out once a year and they got, overweight and they couldn't perform the job? Well, the difference is you can actually physically see the effects of not maintaining your physical fitness.
yeah, and
What we don't see is what are the effects of not maintaining our mental health and wellness. You don't see that. That's silent. That's up here in my
yes,
head, and nobody usually knows about that except for me.
and that's the one thing that we're pushing for in our center now is that we do have access to mental health. Right now, we have the ability to seek out mental health, but we have to go through our wellness clinic, who then has to refer us out to a counselor, and then we have to wait to be scheduled. And
So there's barriers
yeah, we
there.
we may or may not get seen. We don't have anything that's right then and there when we need it. So that's the one thing we're pushing in our center.
And that's a big complaint.
Yes.
That's a big complaint that I hear over and over from a lot of first responders, the ones that we deal in crisis that contact Mind the Frontline's Mind Shield, peer support team. It's, a lot of them. And I say this every episode because it's a good reminder to anybody that's listening to this. I will tell you that right now, and this is one of the initiatives with Mind the Frontline is to, compile the data, right? There's not a lot of organizations out there that are actually compiling data on first responder mental health and wellness. But we are trying to look at as many data points as we possibly can. And because we're not localized to just a state or a city, like we are nation and worldwide in some instances, we're trying to compile that data and make it open source. But I can share that almost 95% of the people that activate our peer support in crisis, they've never gone to therapy. They don't even have a therapist on hand. And they talk about the same challenges that you have. Once again, if I am aware of the challenges that someone else might have faced to try to get in and see a therapist, I might look at that as being overwhelming and might not even begin to even start that path versus, if we had a good streamlined process that we know reduced some of those barriers. So it's like, hey, I need help, I get help. And I get help within 12 hours and really it should be no later than 48 hours. But sometimes that's a challenge. And that's a challenge that departments and agencies and healthcare systems are going to have to overcome, in the near future and moving on into the future, because we know that if we have these barriers in place, people are more apt not to use them. And that's my challenge to a lot of you listeners and viewers. If you don't have a therapist, whether you go see one once a year, you don't need to go see a therapist when you're broken or you're having marital issues or stress. Just go make an appointment so you have someone that you've already kind of built that relationship with, so you know whether or not they're going to work for you if you get in crisis. But more importantly, that when you need them, you can basically reach out to them and like, hey, I need your next available. I'm really having a strong, hard day. And, you know, some of these individuals, they start getting those suicidal ideations and thoughts of suicide and self-harm, and they don't want to talk to anybody. But if I already had someone I built a relationship with that kind of knows a little bit about me, I might be more apt to ask for help. And that's one of the things we're trying to normalize as an organization is ask for help early. Ask for it early. whether you think you need it or not. And that's another common question I get, when we have someone call our peer support line, or our staff does, is I don't know if I need help, but this is the way I'm feeling. And, we can help them navigate those feelings and hopefully identify that, hey, you're having some challenges that you're going to need, to work through.
Yeah.
And here are some tools and resources to help you with that. But if we don't have these tools set up beforehand, the likelihood of us actually utilizing them when we're in crisis, because I've been in crisis, I know exactly what that feels like with my 2 suicide attempts. Like, I didn't ask for help from nobody. I didn't call my friends. I didn't call my best friend. I didn't call my wife. I didn't tell it. I just went off into the wilderness, buddy.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening.
There's a lot of programs out there that are for first responders, and especially for dispatchers. For those that are dispatchers, there's several dispatch groups on Facebook that have resources that will connect you to mental health counselors within your state or a surrounding state. And there's at least 2 in Indiana that specialize in first responders. If I remember correctly, there's one up in around Fort Wayne, and then there's one in the Lafayette, Terre Haute area of Indiana. And they specialize in first responders, and they're there for you. So if you
after this show, I would absolutely love to get that list so we can add it to our list of resources that is continuing to grow, because that's one of the things we're trying to do is give people hey,
yes,
if you're in this state, click on this map and this is what will help you, or here are the resources that we know of that are available specifically for first responders. And more importantly, hopefully a first responder has utilized those resources to say, hey, I kind of vet this. It's obviously up to our community, but there are resources out there that say they're first responder specific. And I know through my own personal experience, that it couldn't be further from the truth. And I call those landmines. And sometimes if we step on a landmine, like that might be the only landmine we step on. I fortunately enough was resilient enough to step on a couple and get through. And that was kind of one of my reasons for doing Mind the Front Line. But yeah, I mean, you talk about these resources, what about peer-to-peer support? How does that in your dispatch center play that crucial role of mitigating some of this emotional toll on 911 dispatchers and allowing you guys to debrief and share your experiences, and more importantly, seek advice from other colleagues of, hey, what did you do when you were feeling like this? What did you do to get out of this rut, get out of the fog, get out of the bottom of the pit?
well, unfortunately for us, we don't have a formalized peer-to-peer support group. That is something that my coworker Heather and myself are trying to establish. Through Indiana, we have to be licensed. We have to take training from a licensed professional, and then we have to become certified through the state. It's a process, but without being formalized, we can still talk to each other and discuss things. There's 4 of us that have 9 years or more experience as dispatchers, and the rest of our crew is less than a year in service. So we kind of talk to them about calls that we've experienced to kind of give them a heads up of what to expect, and let them know, hey, this kind of call, this is how it affected us. So just be ready to have that experience, and this is probably how you're going to feel, but just know that we're here to talk if you need to talk about it. For instance, it was my first type of call for this, but Sunday night, me and my co-worker, she's been there since August. We took 2 phone 911 calls for a county next to us. It spilled over into ours, and it was a shooting. Some guy had came into a house and started shooting. And we heard the screams of the family after they found one of the victims had passed. And thinking about it now, it did affect me. At the time, I didn't think it would affect me, but thinking about it now, what if that was my family? I'd probably be doing the same thing. But I had turned to my coworker and I said, "Hey, do you want to discuss this? Do you want to discuss this call? How do you feel about it?"
Yeah.
And at the time, she said, "No, I feel fine. I don't want to talk about it right now." And I said, "Okay, well, if you ever change your mind, if on your days off, if it starts to bother you, call me and we can discuss it." And that's kind of how I feel other dispatchers, and not just dispatchers, but firefighters, the law enforcement, EMTs. That's what they need to do. If they don't have a formalized uh, support group or a counseling service that they can go to, is just reach out to your coworker that or your supervisor, somebody that has experience, and say, "Hey, this call's affecting me. I don't know why, but this is how I feel." And just sit there and discuss it. Sometimes that's the best course of action. Is just to sit there and discuss how you're feeling
Talk.
and how that call affected you. And sometimes you can get
Check in with yourself.
and sometimes you can get good advice from somebody that has experienced that and how they coped with it. And sometimes they can say, "Hey, well, hell, maybe you probably need to reach out to somebody in the that has the ability to help you with this. Seek out some counseling. We can direct you in that way, and we can give you time off so you can deal with it."
You're kind of like a mental health and wellness mentor, if you think about it. And first off, I'll applaud you because there are a lot of programs out there that I'm discovering do not actually have a formalized peer support kind of process or system internally. There's also others that may have some of these, but really it might be some designated employees that may or may not have some additional training, but they're not trying to track. There's no tracking. There's no, hey, based on this, these signs and symptoms, this is when the individual called, like looking at trends, like, hey, when are you getting these activation for peer supports? Monday, Sundays, Tuesdays, what time of day? What are the common complaints? There's a lot of things that I think we as an industry could be better at, but you have to start somewhere. And if you don't have something within your own agency, doing exactly what you said, Corbin, is just step up. Having people that are willing to basically say, "Hey, I'm passionate about this. I have my own struggles and I'm aware of those, but maybe I can be a mentor to you. Maybe I can give you some advice and some guidance, and more importantly, like just being open to a conversation, because getting connection, especially in these moments, deep connection, not just like, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing well." No, 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 Corbin, like really, brother, like between you and I, like, how are you really doing, man? Like, and pushing for that. More importantly, just the follow up. What we're seeing is just like with EAP programs, "Hey, I'm 10 and done. Like, see you later, get out the door." Nobody's following up on those individuals, weeks later, months later, a year later, to see if that actually is resolved or not. They
Yeah,
just assume that after 10 visits, things are great.
sometimes it just
Just
sits there
like,
and festers
you know,
until it just eventually boils over. It can take
yeah, it comes
months
back.
to a year, years before it finally comes to full light.
So having someone that really kind of can mentor, or and I hate to use this, but I do like to borrow some other ideas from outside industries and other programs that might be beneficial, maybe not, and this might shut some people off, but I actively work in AA, and one of the things I have found a huge benefit is just having a sponsor. Doesn't mean I need them every day, but I'm just used to calling and checking in, and they kind of hold me accountable, but they also check in on me. Having someone that comes back, a week later, a couple days later, and go, "Hey, we talked a couple of days ago, how are you doing? Like, are you feeling better? Are you still struggling with some things?" And honestly advocating for them, like having an advocate for this individual who might be struggling. Maybe they're not, maybe it's resolved. But if we don't have someone that's willing to speak up, follow up, and things like that, these individuals might get the initial stuff, and then we go, "Hey, great, all is well again," right? And
Yeah,
it
it's
really isn't. And it just, like you mentioned, it just festers like a splinter until eventually, and I tell everybody this, at some point that it is going to come back and haunt you. It may not be right now, maybe not be in a month, could be a couple years. Like I still have unresolved trauma that I wasn't even aware of, that some days it just
Yeah,
pops up.
same.
And I actually had one of those this morning when I was swimming in the pool doing my laps before I came into work. Man, I was just swimming there, swimming laps, and all of a sudden this drowning call came up as I was in the pool, and I was like, I haven't thought about this call in probably 15 freaking years. And all of a sudden it was very real in that moment, man. It just, I could feel it. I could smell it. I was starting to have these intrusive thoughts, and I was like,
Time to
okay,
get out of the
I
pool.
got to put this on the books, and time to, well, I didn't get out of the pool. I stuck with it, but it definitely raised a red flag in my head. And once again, I have the tools and the awareness to go, okay, this is unresolved trauma. It's still there. It's intrusive. This is something I need to either bring to, somebody either in my own team, because I utilize my own peer support team sometimes because I get overwhelmed, and I've been doing this for a while. So it tells, hey, we're not fallible. None of us are infallible. Like, it happens all the time, and some days it'll come back. And but it allowed me to reach out and say, hey, I talked to one of my peer support team members and leaned on them and said, I just need someone to talk to, because this is obviously something, and now I'm aware of it, so I'm going to be able to bring it into therapy with my therapist and really work through it and put it to bed, because hopefully now that I'm aware of it, I can actually do something about it, and I'm armed with that knowledge of the options I have to actually do something about it, so it doesn't come back, or if it does, it's not as intrusive as it was this morning, to the point where, okay, it's going to be there with me. I accept that, but I don't need to give it power. I don't need to let it destroy my life. I don't need to have all that anger come back and be that asshole again. And I know that if I don't deal with it, that is exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I have a call similar to that. Not a drowning, but a car wreck that still replays in my head constantly. And I,
Yeah.
when it first happened, I was angry and I didn't talk about it. And that's one of my many calls that sticks with me, like you said, and it just kind of festers there. But now that I've got the tools to recognize these problems, I'm able to talk about it, and I discuss it with my coworkers, especially the new ones. That, hey, this is what I've dealt with in the past, and so if we take a call like this, expect me to be a little grouchy, afterwards, but this is why, and just kind of help me deal with it.
You give them
So
a proverbial heads
yeah,
up. Yeah,
so
you give them a proverbial heads up, like, hey, feeling a little off today, and that's okay. Like, I wish more people would come on duty while they're doing their morning brief, whether it's the fire station, whether it be shift change, whether it be roll call, wherever your profession is in the public service. I wish there was the opportunity, and more importantly, like, it was normalized to the point where, like, you could do exactly what you just said, Corbin. Hey guys, gals, whoever, I'm having an off day. I might be short. I might this. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I feel like this, but just making people aware, because guess what? Hopefully throughout the day, there's little opportunities where they can lift you up or support you or just be aware of. So when that does happen, or if those signs start manifesting themselves, it's also a red flag for them to then check in on you and do a buddy check. And hey, I noticed that, you're feeling a little grumpy, you're a little off, you're being a little bit snippy, whatever that might be, or you're being really, really quiet. If there was I'm usually an extrovert. So when you see someone like me really turn inside and I'm quiet, like, that's a sign. And there's some people in my community that pick up on that and they go, hey, Chris, like, are you okay? Because, haven't seen you post anything on social media lately, and sometimes I just get busy, but there's people out there that watch and they look, and I applaud those people, because that's really, we need more people like that, more people to advocate and check in. And not all of them have those tools of looking for what are those signs, and then it's more important, like, hey, if you recognize the signs, like, what do you do about it? How do I approach this individual? And I would tell them, just like you said, just check in. Hey, are you really okay? And it's okay to not be okay. Like, giving them that opportunity to create that safe space so that they can then kind of talk with you and hopefully get whatever's bothering them off their chest. I can tell you every time I talk to someone when I'm struggling, I always feel better afterwards. Now, do I want to do it in the moment? No, I'm usually hesitant because I have fear. I have unknown biases that have been placed throughout my career. And those are all detriments to my recovery. But I'm becoming more aware. And I can only imagine the people that aren't armed with these tools or the education. Um, they don't know what they don't know. And so how could you see the signs and symptoms? Like if, as an EMT, for example, right? If I didn't know what the signs and symptoms were for a heart attack, how would I even think it was a heart attack? I'd probably be like, oh, you're just feeling a little sick to your stomach. Yeah, just go ahead and sleep it off, man. That nausea and vomiting will go away.
Yeah.
you know?
You just got to learn to recognize it. And again, if you can't recognize it, like you said, your friends and family can sense it, and your coworkers can sense it. For me, occasionally I shut down and I'll just have a blank stare. My wife will see it, and she'll ask me several times if I'm okay throughout the day, just because I have that silent and not really talking as much. So,
And the good thing is, like, when you're going through recovery, using your relationship, and I'll also use my relationship as an example, but as I've been able to get those tools and the self-awareness, like, so has my significant other. They know when I'm having an off day. And more importantly, like, they know when I'm triggered and they know when to give me space or when to push it. And those are very helpful, especially because we know this isn't going to go away. And we know that divorce rates are extremely high, and nobody really wants to get divorced from the person that they love. And I don't want to cause trauma to my family. Trust me, like, I've already done enough, and I have to be remorseful and feel that guilt, but I also need to understand and give myself grace and go, hey, I can move forward from this. I can be a better person. And the ways to do that is, more importantly, by talking and making other people aware of my emotional state. And that's emotional intelligence. And that's something that I feel like a lot of individuals in our profession don't often have. I think we could do a lot more emotional intelligence training, so people are able to check in with themselves and know when when they're off, and how to ask, so, for whatever resource they might need. But hey, I'm having an off day. Like, that should be normal. Nobody want. I hate it when people come in. Yeah, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Everybody's doing great in this room, but I can probably tell you that maybe one, if not more, are probably not so great. But it's just like a rehearsed response because that's all we know. So having those thoughtful discussions around shift change, debriefs, in the morning. I brought up with these chiefs also, why don't you have an emotional check-in in the morning? Hey, how you doing? And have everybody share that. It takes time, right? Like, I'm not saying like you're going to go into a fire station and this is going to just take off. Like, it's probably going to be met with resistance, and it's because a lot of people, it's uncomfortable, right?
well,
So if it's uncomfortable, we typically have fear. And so we have fear and we go, nope, I'm not doing this. Like, they're looking for a reason to terminate me, or we instill all these other stupid ideas in our head that basically prevent us from doing the things that are right. But I said, hey, over time, if you have some leaders that can champion this from the bottom up, right? Because I know what it feels like when you have a top down kind of initiative. The Chiefs have a great idea, but really to get buy-in, you got to get the buy-in from the ground, and just support those individuals and give them the tools, the resources, the capabilities to then push it up and get the buy-in. But hey, what if every morning, when you have your guys come on shift, I'm not saying that shift change between the two shifts, but hey, this is my crew today. Having the captain lead an emotional intelligence kind of check-in, and maybe we're talking about anxiety today, or tomorrow we're going to talk about depression, but we're going to have these discussions and normalize them. And over time, you shift the culture.
Yeah, that's the big thing. You got to shift that culture and in the direction of, it's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to talk about the problems you're having, because like we said earlier, it's the culture right
But if I
now.
was a captain,
It's we don't express our feelings. You hide it. You don't talk about it. We
absolutely.
bury that deep down below. We don't want to hear it. And now it's, hey, it's okay to talk about it. Let's talk about it, because we're starting to recognize now that it is a problem. And
if I was a captain or, a trauma manager or an ER manager, in charge of a shift, a patrol sergeant, like any example of leadership, right? Mid management, middle
Yeah.
management. You're not the guy, but you oversee and you have people that are entrusted in your care and your leadership. But what I was saying to these chiefs is like, if I was a captain on duty that day, I would much rather know that Julie is struggling and probably having a hard day so I can be aware of that. So I might just be like, hey, why don't you just sit this one out? Just stay in the truck. Like, we got this. We don't need you. Like, take some time or just be aware. So, hey, maybe I'm not so hard on that individual today and really trying to push him. Maybe because there's time to push, but there's also times to just step back and give people the space that they need.
Yeah,
And
it's
sometimes,
all about
if there's a
recognizing it.
lot going on at home, exactly. If you recognize something, you can respond to it appropriately. But if you're not aware of it and you can't recognize it, well, you're actually, but could be potentially doing harm. And I love the phrase like do no harm, but do no harm. Um, you should know what kind of harm you might cause these individuals. And oftentimes we just don't, we're ignorant. We don't have the tools. We don't have that emotional intelligence. And so, I love, this discussion and where we might potentially go in the future. And whether it's, emotional check-ins in the morning or a shift change, I don't know. I can't tell you what's going to work and what's not going to work yet because I just don't have the data. But hopefully over time and as we continue to push these programs and have these conversations just like this one, Corbin, like I hope to get feedback from other individuals on, hey, are we going on the right track? Is this something that you guys would do?
Yeah,
And sometimes it's uncomfortable and people don't want to do it, but sometimes it's like, oh, I never even thought about that. Like, that's actually a great idea. I'm going to try it. And someone takes it and runs with it. And that's all it takes is one person, like you mentioned, that just takes it and runs with it.
yeah, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to have these kind of discussions um, about the need for the mental health and the different programs that you can implement into your everyday workplace to help you. Um, like I said, we have implemented the emotional support animal. A lot of dispatch centers are using, dogs. Surprisingly, one of our
Dogs, skunks,
we
apparently.
have
Like, that's a new
skunks.
one for me. But I mean, hey,
They're not,
really
they're
anything,
fun. We have a
anything that
dispatch
gives
center
you
up
that.
north of us. They have a pig.
My wife would love that. She loves pigs. She's always wanted to get a pet
But
pig. And I'm just like, no,
from what I
I got to draw
heard,
a line somewhere.
it can no longer come inside because it's too big. But it still makes
Oh,
visits
well,
outside. But it's there for them if they need it. Um, we're
Well, I
supposed to be
mean,
getting a
emotional support animals are not, having just an animal, a dog, being able to bring your home pet, things like this.
yeah.
We
It's
know that these animals offer companionship and comfort, right? It helps alleviate, some of the stress, some of the emotional toll that it takes during difficult shifts. And I know the research suggests that interacting with animals, I mean, that's what happens. We start reducing our cortisol levels, which are pegged usually when we're having a bad day
yes,
or we're just feeling off. Like usually when you look at your cortisol levels, and for some of us, they might be pegged for several days. And so, like I have an emotional support animal. I got a PTSD therapy dog, Portia. She will come up and she knows when I'm off. Like you'll see her get up and come over. She also protects me from under the individuals that she might sense that might be adding to my stress. And it's funny because while they and it's not a good reaction, I should say, but sometimes she'll growl. And she's never bitten anybody, but mainly it's to create that barrier that, hey, you're triggering my owner. This is my owner. I'm here to protect him when he doesn't even know he needs to be protected. And I could be more thankful for Portia. She comes with me to conferences as I speak. She comes to my office, like, and everybody else loves her too. And so you'll see that it just makes the office a little bit more light,
yeah.
right? And I love it.
My coworker, Heather, um, she's been invited to several conferences this year now um, to talk about emotional support animals, and they've all requested that she bring Nugget with her. So that's what she's doing this year. In fact,
Love it.
she's getting ready to go to one next month, I believe. She's
And we're seeing more and more about this, and I love it because at least it starts. We're starting to have the discussion, and as we
yes.
have the discussion, we start normalizing the discussion, and then hopefully that opens up more doors and more inroads of okay, maybe I took something away, and now this dispatcher is going to have an emotional support animal, or they're going to implement a peer support program, or they're going to do an emotional intelligence check-in in the morning. Whatever that looks like. The thing is we are actually
We're
having the
recognizing it. We're
conversations
getting it
about
out there,
we're
and
recognizing it, and we're more focused on okay, how can we now prevent this from even getting to the if someone needs peer support, I'd much rather have them with the tool, so hopefully they don't need to use it or lean so heavily on it. Now it's always a good tool, it's always there, and we need that on some days, but the less frequent I could use it or the intensity, the more likelihood I can break the PTSS and really prevent, the PTSD from setting roots in. I love it. What are some other resources for 911 dispatchers that are out there? You mentioned, Indiana has a couple of resources. What else would you like to share with our viewers and listeners and the dispatchers that might be and hopefully listening today? What are some other tools and resources that you've used that you've heard of? We've talked about emotional support animals. We've talked about kind of peer support, but is there anything else out there that you are aware of or that you've utilized that has helped you in your recovery?
I'm looking into several applications that I've come across. I have an app on my phone. I haven't really played with it much, but from what I've seen, it connects you um, with resources that can help you. There's a company out there called Mindbase. They have a system in place. Buy into that.
So some of the tools that I use. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm looking for other tools and stuff that we can use. My coworker, she's looking for tools and information that we can use. She's found several things that we've posted up in our dispatch center that offer resource help and different avenues for us to take.
And that's it. It's just trying to find the resources, and this is one of the things that we're trying to do with Mind the Frontline is bring all these resources onto one database,
Yes.
right? You click on, hey, national, I'm a dispatcher. Boom, here's some national things. Hey, you live in a certain state. Boom, here are some other resources. It could be AA groups. It could be substance abuse groups. It could be behavioral health, wellness retreats, things like that. But the things that I'm going to share right now are tools that I use or I have used because as I, go throughout my recovery, there's some tools that no longer are applicable and I kind of pull them out of my rotation but I know they're there. And so if I need to bring them back in, but the first three I'm going to talk about cost you absolutely no money. Thinking about box breathing, meditation, journaling, those three things alone are great tools. I mean, you don't necessarily need to go spend money on a fancy app or, even a Mind Shield membership, like with Mind the Frontline, and I'll kind of sell myself short there. But these are free things that you could always do no matter where you're at, and when you're talking about journaling, like, yes, I would prefer people writing, putting pen to paper as we call it. But if you don't, the next best thing, type that sucker out on your notes app or just open up an email, right? You don't have to send it to anybody, but just the ability to put these thoughts and feelings down somewhere. And worst case scenario, if you're driving, just turn on your voice recorder and record. Just talk to yourself. Talk about how you're feeling because when you're doing that, you're checking with yourself. Now, the box breathing, once again, this helps with the cortisol levels, and I talk about box like the shape of a box. So, it's 4 seconds in through my mouth. I hold it for 4 seconds. That's the top of the box. I'm going to breathe out through my nose for 4 seconds. That's the side of the box. And then the bottom of the box is hold for 4. That takes no time or energy. And Corbin, this might be something, and I find myself doing it right here at my desk, right? Because you mentioned you can't break away, right? I might not be able to break away a text. I might not be able to do this, but I might have a momentary 10 seconds or even 30 seconds or 60 seconds in between call to actually do some mindfulness box breathing, close my eyes. It's a little bit cathartic. It's kind of like a meditation technique. But those are some cheap, not even cheap, free, some absolutely free ways that you might be able to work on some things. Some other things that I have found helpful, like the Calm app, Headspace, checking in with myself every day. I like it. It's like, how do you feel today? And I can go back and look and see what days I had bad days. And if I want to write notes about that, if I'm feeling stressed today, maybe I don't know how to work through stress and anxiety or depression or something specific, but some of these apps actually have guided kind of therapies or guided sessions. It could be like 4 courses on how to, overcome stress and anxiety just to give you more
Yeah.
tools. Those typically, do cost a little bit of
For
money,
for me,
but
I
they work,
we're allowed to have our phones with us in our center. Some centers allow you to have your phone, some centers don't. But I turn on Spotify and I put on their
Yeah.
relaxing music, or something that's kind of soothing, and I'll pop in one headphone in one ear. That way I have my other ear to listen, and just kind of.
I love that, and I'll challenge you. This is something that actually one of our peer support team members brought to us in our organization. Through we use Slack to communicate internally. But she's like, hey, what do you guys think about creating our own kind of group? Because we're all kind of together, but we're remote. So how you stay connected? Like, let's create a Spotify list. Let's all just kind of put in our favorite songs and things like that, and that way we can see who I can understand what this individual likes. I like it. It's just another way to engage and kind of get everybody thinking about mental health and wellness, without saying, hey, mental health and wellness. And so Spotify is a great thing. You can actually create a shared list that you share with other people and they can all contribute. So you could have, a Knox County dispatch, Spotify list and have everybody kind of contribute to help out.
Yeah. Sometimes I find music as my stress reliever. I'll just pop on, a soundtrack from a movie, or I kind of have I like to listen to Celtic music and music like that, and I'll have that playing, and it helps.
I love me some good blues.
It just kind of helps take your mind off of things, and that's what I like about it, and that's how I cope during
And
the
what we're
work.
doing is we're staying out of here.
Yes.
We're staying out of our head, right? Like we're listening, we're being engaged, we're trying to be present, and things like that. And those are all things that we need. I think all of those resources that you mentioned are great resources. And like I said, some are absolutely free. Those are tools that you can do right now. It doesn't take anything. You mentioned that, you guys are looking for education and stuff like that. And I am going to make a plug, but our Mind Shield program is something that we've created book lists, podcasts, apps, and we're continuing to grow all of those resources along with just, hey, if I'm in crisis, who can I call? What are some resources available? Things like that. But we're trying to provide education as well. And so we got blogs, obviously these podcasts with the critical conversations and just other tools and tips, because it's not one thing that works for everybody, right? It's having kind of this bank of, hey, here are all these tools. What speaks to what you need to do? Is it working through stress? Is it working through depression? Do you like listening to podcasts or do you want to watch a video? Do you want to go through an actual formal kind of course? There's so many ways to kind of go at this. And it's just one of those ways that, like I said earlier on, it's something that we need to incorporate into our daily routine, just like physical fitness, just like going to sleep, just like eating, breathing. We need to focus and be doing these things, in my opinion, daily. Something, it could be just doing box breathing for today. Maybe I have time to do a little bit more. But if we're not working on it, it's essentially you're losing it or you're going backwards, essentially. And so I would implore people, find some good tools and make some good healthy habits, right? Use these coping techniques because really that's what they are. So that way, when you do have a bad day, you're still able to work through your routine. And what I have found that my bad days aren't near as bad as what they were back when I was struggling and I didn't have those tools and I wasn't educated on what to do, and I just would be like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have a bad day. So let's just pop a bottle or crack some beers and here we go, and all I'm doing is just really hurting myself and those around me. And folks, I really want to give you and empower you. And one of the things, it's motivation, another free thing. And one of the tools that I built into my daily routine is every morning I actually listen. There's a YouTube channel, and I make no affiliation with these guys. It's just something that I picked up a couple years ago, but Motiversity. I listen to these little powerful, like motivational kind of speeches and talks in the morning to kind of like, it sets my day up for success because I feel energized, right? That's exactly what I did when I got out of the pool, actually, Corbin. Instead of sitting in the shit, which I could have just sat in the shit, said, this is going to be a depressing day. I'm going to be off. I'm not going to want to do this podcast. Essentially, I got myself back on track. I self-recovered, and I want to give people those self-recovery tools, whatever works for you, and if you're listening to this episode, a couple of things, don't forget to like and subscribe and share, because this is how we get this information out to other people that may need it. The other thing is leave in the comments, like, let us know what tools work best for you. And if you haven't, please go over to the Mind the Frontline resource page, because we actually have a little tab that says submit a resource. We are crowdsourcing and trying to get our listeners, our viewers, our members, and more importantly, our first responder community to engage with us, so we know and we can be aware. Because what works for me, I might not be aware. Like you mentioned a couple of things, and I'm like, oh, I didn't really think about that. But this is why we want to implore our community to share. And so we can create this centralized database of hopefully good, solid resources. Hey, here are good books to read. When I was down, this is what I did. We are working on a couple of other projects that I can't discuss right now, but I do hope that it continues to be innovative and continue to push people to provide those resources, those tools to be success. Because I'm all about the prevention, bro.
Yes.
Without the prevention, the cure becomes very hard. If I can prevent cancer, it's not as hard as when I get cancer and I gotta go fight with it, and I'm unhealthy. I'm not in a good mental state. Like, so you can see the difference here, folks. So, if you can't really see it in yourself and your mental health, just what I just said, comparing it to something else. If you're not taking care of yourself before you get there, it's like saying, hey, I'm going to just show up today and go run a marathon. If you haven't trained for that, if you haven't prepared it, it's going to suck a lot more than even just a little bit of training, right? More training is always better, but just something, folks. And really, I would implore you to do it every day. Try to find a good routine. Try to, I'm all about habit stacking. I get up in the morning, my alarm goes off, my feet get off the ground. I'm hitting the ground running, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. And what you find is you build these really good, healthy routines, which then turn into really good coping mechanisms, especially for the days like I had this morning where you really do need them. So,
Yep.
Corbin, thank you so much for being
No
on,
problem.
brother. Anything else that out of everything we've kind of talked about, anything else you want to kind of leave? Any last thoughts you want to share with your fellow dispatchers out there?
Yeah. It's popped into my head quite a few times throughout this, but I think you've kind of touched base on it too. But if you're questioning whether or not you need help, go get help, because you're starting to recognize that something's wrong. If you think if something's bothering you, speak out, let somebody know, go get help, because that's a sign that something is wrong. And if you just let it sit there, it's going to build and build, and then eventually it's going to take over. If you have a critical call, one of those high intensity, low volume calls, it's going to affect you, whether it be right then or later on down the road. Talk about it. Have that after action review on what happened, how it made you feel, and just discuss it. The more we talk about it and be open about how it's affecting us, the better off we're going to be, and the less chance of us building up this stress and then exploding later on.
I love it, man. And kind of adding to what you said, because I really think this drives it home. Folks, if you don't think you're okay, or you feel like you're off and you're not sure, there's nothing bad that comes from going and talking to someone. I promise you, whether you were feeling bad or didn't know, like, you will feel better than where you felt before you started that connection. So, it's not necessarily asking for help, just calling someone and having a conversation with an old friend, and kind of bringing it up. Like, I'm just kind of having an off day. Like I called my brother the other day when I was out driving just because I needed to go for a drive. And I was just like, hey, I'm just calling you because I feel a little off. I don't know why. Not sure. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but nothing came out of that. Nothing bad came out of that phone call. If anything, it was a good opportunity for me to check in with my brother.
Definitely.
Whether it's checking with my friends, my peer support, you don't feel bad. And we stress the public, like, hey, if you think it's an emergency, just call us, call 911, right? I remember in Air Medical, like, hey, if you think it's serious, just activate us. We'll come hang out over your head. And if you don't need us, we'll go home. I mean, obviously it's a sales tactic. I know that now. But at the same time, it's normalizing asking for help, right? We've done it in other ways. We just need to do it with ourselves. And so, Corbin, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story, being vulnerable, and really kind of sharing your knowledge and experience, as a 911 dispatcher. So not only other dispatchers, but hopefully other first responders can take something away from this episode. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. And that's my goal is again, to bring this to light and hopefully this has an impact on somebody.
That's all it needs to have. One person. That's all I do it for. One person, 24 hours a day. That's all I got. So keep it up. And you are. I can tell you just from the outside looking in, you are making a difference. You are pushing programs. You're trying to make change in your own department. And we know that it can be a struggle. Sometimes it can be defeating, but just keep it up, brother. I call it KFG. So just KFG and keep going, brother. As we conclude another enlightening episode of Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline, we would express our heartfelt gratitude to Corbin for sharing his valuable insights on navigating the emotional tolls on dispatchers. His depth, his knowledge, his experience has really added to this conversation, and hopefully it helps and impacts you as you take something away, at least something away from today's episode. And I highly, encourage you to leave feedback in the comments, like this episode, share it with your friends so we can continue to make an impact, so we can continue to give people and arm them with the knowledge and really kind of push and foster that ounce of prevention so we can prevent that pound of the cure. So I thank you again, Corbin. Let's continue these critical conversations together and build a stronger, more resilient first responder family. Thank you for being a part of the Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the frontline.
To our dedicated listeners, thank you again for joining us on this critical journey. Remember, the Critical Conversations podcast is a steadfast resource for police, fire, EMS, allied healthcare workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Your support makes the impact of these conversations resonate even further. If you found today's discussion enlightening and want to stay connected with our ongoing mission, please be sure to subscribe to the Critical Conversations podcast. You can find us via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and the Mind the Frontline website. Your subscription ensures that you will never miss an episode, and it's a powerful way to show your commitment to fostering resilience within the entire first responder community. For more information and additional resources, visit our website at www.mindthefrontline.org. Together, let's continue these critical conversations and build a stronger, more resilient first responder family. We thank you for being a part of the Critical Conversations podcast. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the front line.